not hear me? Okay, there it is. Okay, my name is Veronica Famat, and I am the Policy and Practice Dissemination Coordinator for the Center for Evaluation and Educational Effectiveness, or CEEE. That's what we call it here at Cal State Long Beach. Thank you for joining us. Good morning. We're excited to host today's webinar, Overcoming Challenges in Evaluation for Department of Education Funded Grants at Hispanic Serving Institutions. This webinar is part of a series of webinars and briefs dedicated to examining and fostering effective practices to support the success of first-generation, low-income, and/or Hispanic students in STEM at Hispanic Serving Institutions. These webinars and briefs are part of a broader project that have received funding from the U.S. Department of Education. CEEE is part of a partnership that involves 10 California State University campuses working together to learn collectively about how best to support HSI STEM student success. Our goal with this project is to broaden the conversation beyond California and the CSU and share what we're learning, both the good and the bad, and engage with our colleagues nationally to identify challenges, opportunities, and promising practices. For more information on this project, you can go ahead and go to our website. Let me go ahead and show you our website. Here you go. So for more information on the project, you can go to our website shown here. And for any questions regarding this project or future webinars or past webinars, you can send questions to me directly at my email shown on this slide as well. Now, I'd like to go ahead and point out a few features from Zoom that are available to everyone. So all of us are muted, all participants are muted right now. And if you hover over your mouse over your screen, you'll be able to see the chat function. If you're experiencing any audio or visual issues, please use this feature to alert me. I will be monitoring the chat activity throughout the webinar. You can also use this feature to communicate with each other. We're going to be holding the Q&A session towards the end of the presentation, in which point you will be able to pose questions to our presenters. If you like someone's question or you were thinking of asking the same question and you see another participant ask on the Q&A, you have the ability to upvote that question, which will move it right back to the top of the queue, and the presenters will be able to see that question among the first few questions that are posed to them. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be closed captioned and uploaded to our website. Everyone who registered for this webinar will receive an email once the recording is made available. You can also access past webinars on this website. Okay, now I would like to introduce you to our presenters. First, we have Rebecca Eddy. She is the founder and current president of Cobblestone Applied Research and Evaluation, Inc., which serves clients throughout the U.S. with offices in Southern California, Washington, D.C., and Seattle, Washington. She is the primary evaluator on more than 80 external evaluation projects. She has 20 years of experience in teaching and conducting evaluation and applied research studies, including 14 Department of Education Title III and Title V funded grants. She continues to train new evaluators through the Certificate of Advanced Study in Evaluation at Claremont Graduate University. Steven Margell has held positions as both staff and faculty in higher education. He currently leads the evaluation efforts for the Department of Education Title III grants with an emphasis on cross-campus collaborations. Beyond standard reporting procedures, his efforts focus on rigorous evaluation of various grant-funded activities and student support services, followed by dissemination of results to inform policy on campus to support and institutionalize effective programming. With that being said, I would just like to add that I'm very excited about today's webinar, as we're getting to hear from both an external evaluator and an internal evaluator. And with that being said, I would like to now turn it over to Steven. Steven, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry about that.
There you are.
I was muted. Thanks, Veronica, for the introduction.
No problem.
And I am not convinced my screen is sharing correctly. Sorry about that, everyone. So, thanks for joining us today. My name is Steven Margell, and as Veronica said, I'm the lead evaluator for Title III HSI STEM grant at Humboldt State University in California. Today, we'll be covering a wide range of topics, starting with a brief background on the Higher Education Act, Title III and Title V grants. After that, we'll discuss evaluation and evaluators, followed by both program and evaluation design. Then we'll discuss how to identify appropriate measures of success, reporting the results of your efforts, and how your evaluation process can be used strategically to respond to your unique campus needs. Throughout the presentation, we'll be discussing various challenges that Rebecca and I have encountered, as well as solutions to those challenges. However, I'm sure there will be challenges that are unique to your program, and if you'd like to bring those to the question and answer box, we'll discuss those at the end of the presentation. Again, as Veronica mentioned, if you're having issues with video or audio, please use that chat feature to communicate with Veronica directly. Now, the Higher Education Act of 1965 is intended to strengthen the educational resources of our colleges and universities and to provide financial assistance for students in post-secondary and higher education. Today, we'll focus on the Title III and Title V sections, and specifically those subsections which relate to Hispanic Serving Institutions. Broadly speaking, Title III grants are intended to equalize educational opportunities for minoritized and low-income students. They're meant to support colleges and universities that serve students who historically have been denied access to post-secondary education due to race or national origin, and whose participation in higher education is in, frankly, our nation's best interest, so that equality of access and the quality of post-secondary education opportunities are enhanced for all potential students. Funding is intended to expand the capacity of your institution to serve minoritized and low-income students. Specific goals of Title III grants include improving and strengthening the academic quality, the institutional management, and the fiscal stability of the campus. Title III institutional programs are wide-ranging, from the ANAPESI to HSI STEM programs to SIP programs, just to name a few, but there are others. Program eligibility is predetermined by the Department of Education using campus data from the federal IPEDS reporting of your student composition. Your institutional research office is responsible for submitting this data, and the Department of Education has an eligibility matrix where you can look up your institution and see which programs you are eligible for. We have a link to the eligibility matrix in a recommended reading list that Veronica will be sending out to everybody that registered for the webinar after we conclude. So you can find that eligibility matrix, as well as all of our references that we're citing today on that recommended reading list. Moving on to Title V grants, these are intended to support colleges and universities' efforts to improve and expand their capacity to serve Hispanic students and other low-income students. Funding is intended to expand and enhance academic offerings, program quality, and institutional stability. The DHSI and POHA are Title V institutional programs that are Hispanic serving in nature. And again, program eligibility for these different grant programs is predetermined, and you can look yourself up on that eligibility matrix that we'll send out after the presentation. Now, let's discuss why evaluation is important and how your evaluation plan can strengthen your program goals. Even as early as in the grant proposal stage, the evaluation plan helps you to set timelines and goals for your program activities. Additionally, program evaluation is required for all Title III and Title V grants in order to appropriately determine the merit or worth of the programming. The initial results of your evaluation can and should be used to improve the programming throughout the lifetime of the grant. Evaluation also keeps you accountable to both federal requirements, but it's also critical to keep your programming relevant to campus needs. Both federal and campus stakeholders, such as departments and administrators, must be informed of the programming efficacy in order to work towards institutionalization. And finally, evaluation is critical to inform conversations related to future funding of the program once those federal funds are exhausted. The Department of Ed provides a fantastic document titled Guidance on Evaluation. This is also cited in your recommended reading list. This website has very good examples of impact and evaluation criterion questions to help guide you both during your development and while reviewing the evaluation results to inform program development. We're not going to be going into those questions today, but they're available and they are valuable considerations when designing your evaluation plan. Now I'm going to be handing off to Rebecca Eddy, who will continue speaking about evaluators and program design, as well as evaluation design. And Rebecca, I see you're still on mute.
I apologize for that. Thanks so much, Steven.
No problem.
Yes, okay. Thanks so much again for being here today. We want to talk about quite a few things related to evaluation. As Veronica mentioned initially, I am an external evaluator, whereas Steven is an internal evaluator. So we've got a little bit different perspective when it comes to working with programs to do their evaluation. First, I want to acknowledge that I have an entire team of people that work with me, with our clients, that really do a fantastic job, and I wanted to acknowledge them now. They include Namrata Patel, Minnie Patelski, Nicole Galport, Ashley El-Shahayed, Courtney Coulter, and Dave Mendelson, and our really terrific clients, which include several of the CSUs, and including California State University, San Bernardino, and that's the reason why we're here today talking about them. So wanted to give a little bit more information in our experience, what to expect when working with an evaluator, because we often get calls from people who haven't worked with an evaluator before, or writing a Title V or Title III grant for the first time and don't really know what to expect from the process. So I just wanted to give a little bit of insight into what you can expect. In the proposal stage, often we like to be in the early part of it, where we can provide lots of recommendations related to research literature that might be relevant, measures that may be used to be able to track some of this data you will collect over the course of the program, including valid and reliable scales, which we prefer to use. And this should be related to both implementation data as well as short-term and long-term outcomes. We also like to work with programs to be able to really think through what are some feasible targets that they would like to achieve during the course of the grant. Often it's about a 5-year project, and to really identify things that are appropriate performance measures that are realistic to achieve in the time frame allotted. So it's something that we like to do. Now we don't always have the opportunity to work on the proposal stage, but when we do, we like to be able to have as much of this ingrained as possible, so when we do the evaluation design, it's appropriate. Once you're actually working on the evaluation and the program is underway after it's been funded, we'd like to have ongoing communication regarding what's happening within the program and the evaluation. So some prospective clients sometimes have the understanding that we come in maybe once or twice a year to kind of just check on things. We don't like to work that way, because we like to have an ongoing conversation about program development, as well as how we can, establish, good data collection systems and things like that. So we like to be fairly involved on a regular basis. Often the challenge is being able to collect, data that they haven't collected before, or creating more efficient or more feasible data collection systems, or using instruments that would be appropriate. And this is something that evaluators generally can help with, because they have experience doing this sort of work, even if it's sort of setting up a data template to be able to collect something locally on campus for a program. We often help with the submission for IRB documents, the renewal. We know a lot about ethics and consent forms and what's appropriate to ask. And so that's often what the evaluation team will be charged with doing as well. Of course, we analyze all the data. Your evaluator should have a lot of experience doing this kind of work related to usually both quantitative as well as qualitative analysis, and then taking those data and being able to translate that into reasonable data-based recommendations, and then being able to do, again, initially based on program improvement, some more formative kinds of evaluation tasks, and then ultimately determining merit of worth in a summative evaluation at the end. Each year there are reports due, as of course those of you who are familiar with these, an initial progress report or the annual progress report. We usually help with those to be able to make sure that everything is covered and accurate, both in the executive summary as well as the other parts of the report. And then we actually do, and Steven will talk about this a little later in terms of the other reporting options, we actually do what we call a local report, which is a really good integration of everything that's happened in the program throughout the year, including all of the findings, all the implementation, description, all of the outcomes, and then recommendations. And often those are used by sort of a variety of stakeholders to be able to make decisions. And we'll create, when necessary, other documents that are appropriate, like infographics or briefs or other things too that people can use to be able to disseminate the results even more widely. Just a little bit of a contrast between external and internal. If you're not familiar with the differences, obviously, all evaluators should have the technical assistance to be able to help with, reporting and other procedures. They should have a good background in design, both in terms of evaluation design, appropriate program design, as well as methods, and then be able to provide that formative and summative feedback based on everything that they're collecting throughout the program. Whereas Steven, his strength is really as an internal evaluator. So of course, internal evaluators have an advantage of having a really good context for their local institution and an awareness of campus needs that may not be prevalent to someone who's on the outside. They have, good relationships with multiple different programs or people on campus, and then perhaps better insight into, greater strategic plans and how those align with the current grant. The advantage of having an external team or individual is sometimes this is often actually required because the perception is it's going to be more objective to be able to have an accountability. So often NSF will have an external evaluator component within their grant call. We often, again, we've worked with several different institutions, at least 6 different HSIs in particular on these types of grants, and we know what other programs have done and what's worked well. So often that gives us a good insight into what might work well for another institution, just in terms of even the type of data tracking or systems that are available, as well as, the kind of other expertise of how someone solved the problem or what other strategies that might have adopted to be able to help their population of students. So it's really sort of a wider range of breadth that we have across multiple institutions as opposed to just working in depth with one. When thinking about designing a program-specific activities, obviously there's lots of considerations. You certainly want to respond to the priorities outlined in the RFP. But again, that first should be based on needs of students, faculty, others at the institution, right? We want to start with what they actually need or what unmet needs are required at the particular institution. Definitely use empirical research that will guide the design of something that might work well for the population of students or faculty that would be part of the grant. And certainly balancing local needs and with the feasibility of program offerings that's available at a particular institution. And then finally, really thinking about institutionalization as a primary consideration for these types of grants. What else can be left with the institution to strengthen an institution when the grant funding is complete? Okay, again, I want to talk a little bit about empirical research because I think this is something that often programs don't start with, but I think they should really, in terms of when they're designing their program. Obviously, we know a lot, I've learned a lot over time about what works and what doesn't work well, but we still need to, ensure we go through the process of helping to increase the probability of success for any particular program by really relying on things that work. And success is often defined as improving student achievement through grades or pass rates, but success can mean other things as well. And often we want to have long-term outcomes related to things like retention and graduation for students. Again, regardless of the outcome, we want to go through this sort of formal systematic process of using research as a basis for this. So we can define some basic program elements. For example, you might hear that, mentoring is a good idea for students. That's a popular, sort of program activity and something that people know about, but we want to take a few different approaches to this and really think about, okay, what in the research literature, how is mentoring program designed to be able to really affect change in students, or why might mentoring work? And that's what we try to get into, like what are the psychological mechanisms that might be supporting the idea that mentoring might be a good idea for students. Obviously this has to be under the umbrella of allowable program activities, student services or faculty development. But again, we want to start really with, the idea of what is the, participant need that needs to be met, what are our students, have that are currently not being met, that mentoring would help to, sort of ameliorate. And so we need to really operationally define a lot of things, right? So what do we mean by mentoring? What is the correct dosage? What is an adequate dosage? Again, this should all be based on the research literature. And then what evidence do we have that might allow us to believe that mentoring might be a worthwhile intervention for our students and in a particular way? So again, this is all related to the program design. And then once we have done our due diligence with the, to ensure participant needs are met, then we want to make sure that we design the evaluation in response to this, right? So we want to know that, that the evaluation questions are appropriate that we're asking. We want to know how we're tracking implementation of these ideas, right? What are we defining as successful outcomes? What are the key constructs that we're really measuring? We also ask about positive or negative side effects that we didn't pay attention to based on what's been done in the past. So that's something that we really want to make sure that we investigate. And then we also want to have an evaluation design that is the most rigorous and most appropriate for what we're going to be measuring. And then evaluation obviously should be designed as an ongoing effort, which would provide good information about how well the program is being implemented and that connection to some initial outcomes. So again, this would be like the formative stage. And then once we have some evaluation findings, obviously we want to feed that back into the program to be able to have recommendations for improving or tweaking the program some way to be able to improve the effectiveness of that effort. And then ultimately, we want to determine if the program has been successful. And then the idea is to feed this information back into the empirical literature to be able to contribute something to say we know something more about mentoring or some other kind of intervention that could be really helpful for other institutions as well. For those of you who are familiar with What Works Clearinghouse, I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but there's certainly lots of information available about what actually works. And the site is actually pretty good. I will tell you that part of the charge of some of these Title V and Title III grants are to really improve the presence of post-secondary research on What Works Clearinghouse too, because there's not a lot on there currently. It's really very K-12 focused. And so the idea is that with some of these grant funds, you want to have a rigorous enough evaluation design that can measure some of these things, if it's possible, and then try to improve the literature related to some of these interventions. So it's, again, intervention reports, practice guides, you can do a search on there, finding what works. So all of those things are available. The other thing I would recommend too is for those who are just getting started, if you don't know a lot about the research literature and you want to find out what are really good places to start in terms of addressing some of these basic needs. I love Hattie's work on visible learning. There's a lot of K-12 in there too, but it's certainly relevant to post-secondary. The updated version of How People Learn came out late last year. This is the National Research Council publication. It's full of really good basic as well as more applied research. More recently too, something related to more social psych interventions, about WISE interventions. Walton and Wilson came out late last year, and then there's a Nation article too. So we actually have a reading list that is available that we'll distribute it after the webinar to be able to make sure that people have access to some of these recommended sources as well. Really briefly, again, I mentioned at What Works Clearinghouse, there's certainly preference for rigorous evaluation designs within this. We think about having an experiment or having randomly assigned participants as the most rigorous type. Obviously, it has the highest in terms of internal validity, although there are other really good quasi-experimental designs that you can have as well. And those are certainly part of this idea of having a rigorous evidence base. So, but you have to look at things like attrition and baseline equivalence, and there's all these standards too. So your evaluator should be really familiar with these types of standards. The most recent handbook is available. This is version 4, and this is available in on the website. And you should really, you know, kind of take a look at that to make sure that you sort of begin with the end in mind of what kind of evidence that you want to do. Now, not all Title III and Title V grants require this kind of evidence. I know a few years ago that Title III HSI STEM program did require it for some part of the intervention within the grant. So this is something that we're working on with a couple of our programs right now, but it's certainly something that you want to think about as an evaluator, designing the most rigorous possible evaluation, at least in part, as part of the evaluation of the project, to be able to give good evidence of something that's working. Okay, so we want to talk about some challenges and solutions. This specific one is related to program design that we've encountered. There's certainly others, and we would definitely welcome questions at the Q&A at the end. One challenge might be, for example, that the program design isn't feasible for the current population of students. You know, often they're designed sort of as a theoretical exercise by a grant writer or a PI or a combination of people, and sometimes it doesn't actually work when you put it into practice. So a possible solution might be, you know, again, using data to modify elements of the program that aren't meeting the needs of students. This is the whole purpose of having formative feedback and having very regular, you know, visiting the data and looking at the data and seeing if something's working, if not, making a change. Another challenge might be is if you're not sure if a new intervention will work with faculty or, you know, or students or any kind of group, we often will do some pilot testing, whether that's just an instrument or a program element, to be able to make sure that we iron out the design challenges before expanding that maybe to a different department or to the rest of campus. So that's something, the pilot testing should certainly be done initially in the program, and really making sure you work that out, and also seeing, you know, how people react to that too is really valuable in terms of collecting good data before you roll it out to other parts and other entities. Another challenge might be the program setup is going well. It's you know, people are hired and things are in place, but it is really low participation. We find this with some really brand new initiatives that haven't been tried before, and really we find it's often a marketing thing, right? You have to work really hard and really intentionally on making sure people know about you know, what's happening in the program. Often, you know, you can use an advisory board to, you know, members to help get the word out. Certainly do, you know, flyers and social media and other presentations to make sure that people know about what's happening in your program and camp, and it's definitely something that we would recommend that people think really carefully about at the very beginning too, and as opposed to just reacting to it later. Another challenge might be a new policy or campus priorities don't align with program goals or design. We see this happens. I know in the CSU system, a new policy may come out and then campuses have to react to that in some particular way that does impact the project design. And so, you know, the program officer wants to be helpful. We think they need to sort of be put in the loop and, you know, making approved changes if they're not meeting the students' needs, or they're just like potentially violating some policy, or would be for the next year violating some policy that we need to address within, you know, the program design. So those are some things that we can kind of think carefully about. We can, again, entertain other questions about program design if you have some later. With respect to evaluation design, we have a couple of things that have come up as challenges too, which are, you know, good implementation data is not available or applicable to a campus. And so again, this is starting at the very beginning, making sure that we establish accurate and feasible data collection systems. So if we don't know how many people are attending the workshop and we're not collecting that, the idea is to the evaluator worked with the program staff to be able to figure out a really accurate way of collecting those data and getting better at that and seeing what's the least, you know, difficult or the most accurate sort of a balance to be able to do with each of the campus projects. Another one might be the original evaluation design doesn't rigorously test the intervention. And this is what happens often if folk get called in to do something and they're in their second or third year and their other evaluators are no longer working with them and it wasn't designed originally to be a rigorous design. It is possible to be able to then create some more rigorous tests of evaluation, even if it's not at the very first year. So again, being really familiar with design standards, options for types of design, or even some component of that design to be able to test, that's something that we would definitely recommend, even if it's a couple of years in. Another evaluation design challenge might be, you know, that again, design changes in response to local needs or practices. Again, you have to keep in mind the original goals, the original activities that are still relevant. You still have to have, you know, requirements met in terms of what types of activities they're funding. And so being able to reread the original proposal again and make sure that that is, any updates are reflective of those original intentions and goals would be really important to keep in mind. Okay, the other thing I'm going to talk about really briefly is using a logic model. They're often required now in a lot of the grants that we work on in the proposal stage. And if you haven't worked with logic models before, there's lots of resources that will give you. If you are familiar with logic models, that's terrific. You're probably familiar with the idea that often they will be used in program design and evaluation for a number of reasons, you know, really aligning everything in terms of, you know, the program activities and what kind of implementation data you're collecting, and then ultimately how some of these, you know, activities lead to short and long-term outcomes. So there's lots of things that could be done with logic models. And they're dynamic too. They can be done in a couple different ways, but I'll just do a quick review if you're not familiar with what this looks like as a tool to really helping you think through all of these issues. Again, we kind of start with needs, right? As I mentioned too, we want to make sure that what needs are we addressing? Some needs are met needs and some are unmet needs, and we really want to focus program design elements on unmet needs. And so an example might be students come to college unprepared to pass college level math courses. That's not an unfamiliar need for a lot of our campuses that we work with. Then we want to say, okay, what resources do we need? You know, we have lots of institutional resources already. We've got expertise, we've got faculty, we've got staff, physical space, curriculum, whatever that is. So that should be identified in terms of what you need to be able to input as a new part of the system, as well as what you currently have in place to be able to really leverage to be able to implement a new project. We need to figure out what are the specific activities. This is the program design part of it, right? Who will participate? We'll be really clear in terms of what these requirements are, what the dosage is. How can we measure whether something is high quality or not? How can we measure if something is sufficient to meet a need? And that's where we really monitor the implementation to ensure that it's not just sort of the number of students or the types of activities that were present, but is this the right kind of activity? Is this the most appropriate one to meet the need, and are these actually having an effect? And then we, of course, establish the answer to that through determining some outcomes. So often short-term outcomes will be things like, you know, immediate attitude change, like maybe academic self-efficacy, or some other kind of change like increasing content knowledge or math skills. And those will be short-term needs. Those are the kinds of changes we expect to happen as a result of participating in the activity. And then ultimately, what do those lead to? Often the long-term needs are, graduation or retention. Clearly impact or really long-term needs are about achieving a diverse STEM workforce. And that's the kind of thing that we ultimately want to be able to design in each of our projects. A couple other elements that are likely part of your logic model are assumptions, right? We have to identify what those assumptions that we are making, because sometimes those are wrong. So we need to be really explicit about those assumptions. And then also some external factors like, the economy has, huge implications for whether or not people stay in school and choose to be in the workforce as opposed to finish their degree. So there's lots of external things that can happen that are outside of the control of the program activity. So it's something to be able to note about these things to be aware of. A couple of things related to challenge and solutions about logic models. In particular, let's say the challenge's early results fail to show a positive effect on students. So that's when we really sit down and look at, revisit the intervention model in the research literature, right? Is this appropriate? Are we addressing the right need? Is the kind of design of the program really, designed appropriately to meet students, or does this not work with the population? And the idea really here is from Chen, if you're familiar with the literature. We really want to distinguish between implementation failure versus theory failure, because sometimes it was just not implemented well. People didn't attend, the dosage wasn't high enough, it wasn't a high quality delivery of a program, versus theory failure, which is what we assumed was going to happen, really didn't happen and really didn't pan out like we thought we would. And therefore, we need to identify a different kind of intervention to be able to meet needs. So it's being able to really sit down and look at the module, look at the logic model and figure that out. We often recommend revisiting this a couple of years after the project's been in place to be able to see if there are tweaks that can be made. Another challenge might be that there's not enough time to measure long-term outcomes within the time period of the grant. And this is something we see all the time, because if you're familiar with, how these go, the first year you're doing setup and, you're hiring staff and doing all these other things. And often you don't have enough time to be able to do a full, cycle of students who would start and then finish within the 5-year grant period. So we often want to be able to measure longer term outcomes that sometimes may or may not be feasible within the time period of the grant. Sometimes we might say, well, maybe we can have some proxy measures, instead of like actual graduation rates, we can have, progress toward graduation. That could be something that we can measure as even a shorter term outcome that will give us an indication of these longer term things, even though we're reporting long term outcomes as well, like graduation rates and retention rates. Or maybe intention to pursue a graduate degree instead of completing a doctoral program or something, which clearly couldn't be done within the time frame of a grant. So those are just some things to kind of think about in terms of if you don't have that time to be able to do across the timeline of the grant. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Steven now, and he'll talk about our last couple sections related to reporting and addressing individual campus needs.
Thanks, Rebecca. As Rebecca just said, we're going to continue by discussing reporting and campus needs. And with regards to reporting your results, there are many different avenues to report the results of your programming. First of all, federal reporting is, in most cases, mandatory, but it's also important for maintaining dialogue with your program officer, as evaluation results are used to inform programming throughout the lifetime of your grant. Publications are an important outlet to inform the broader dialogue related to the topic and enhance the research literature about what has worked on your campus and may be applicable at another. Presenting both your program design and the evaluation findings at a conference is another valuable outlet to inform the broader dialogue. Conferences are a very important space to network and find campuses that are working towards similar goals, and you may be able to inform one another's work. I'm going to quickly plug the OSSI conference That's the Alliance of Hispanic Serving Institution Educators Conference, and say that this outlet, it's been an incredibly powerful outlet for the team at Humboldt State University. We have strategically invited administrators, key stakeholders on campus, and the directors of critical campus collaborators to attend OSSE with us using our grant funds for travel expenses. The energy and passion at OSSE has had the effect of invigorating the dialogue on campus, and our conversations about institutionalization with various administrators have been greatly improved from inviting them along to see what work is happening in the world today. I'll also mention that OSSE is still accepting submission proposals to present in spring 2020. So if you have something to contribute to the broader dialogue, those submissions are due by October 1st. So you'll need to maybe pursue that avenue. Finally, to further the dialogue on your own campus and keep those key stakeholders informed so they can make the best decisions possible, local reporting is a critical piece of your evaluation design. Having a plan in place to disseminate the results of your research in a digestible format, that is critical and frankly tantamount to the federal reporting. Now, regarding some very real challenges, the Department of Education reporting template does not readily support qualitative data or qualitative results. And I think this is in large part due to the fact that the reporting tool is intended to be applicable to a myriad of grants, and the federal legislation asks for quantitative measures of success. There are, however, 2 points in the report where qualitative data could, and if you've got it, should be included. The first is the focus area outcomes, which has a supporting statement dialog box. And in that supporting statement, you could speak to the qualitative results supporting the efficacy of your programming. A second place in the federal report is the project status, where there's an object narrative and qualitative outcomes could be discussed there as well. Another challenge related to reporting is the format and timing of the federal report, which may not seem to provide information that's immediately useful or related to program efficacy in regards to institutionalization on your campus. We found that developing local reports that are appropriate to the audience and informative to key stakeholders is a valuable avenue to keep those key stakeholders informed. But related to that is the fact that key stakeholders don't have time to read an evaluation report or your beautifully published article. And in this case, you'll likely need to develop multiple deliverables, such as infographics, a 1 or 2 page executive summary, or even a slide deck from a presentation. Rebecca discussed using your evaluation findings to inform modifications to the program design, and you may find that additional data collection systems may need to be developed to inform this process. Additionally, guidance from your program officer can be invaluable as you work to balance the needs of your campus or department with your federal goals and your existing logic model. In my experience, I can't speak for Rebecca, but in my experience at Humboldt State, our program officers have often been open to logic model modifications when they are well-founded in the initial results of the evaluation. Your program officer is on your team, and I think that's an important thing to remember. Your program officer, while managing while managing a large caseload, is on your team, and with some careful consideration, they'll be able to inform modifications to the program design or logic model if necessary, and ensure that those changes are appropriate and defensible. Now, I'd actually like to wrap this all up with a very real challenge we face at Humboldt State and how we implemented an evaluation technique to seemingly resolve the issue. We'll see how things play out over time. But students on campus, some students on campus, were displeased that the HSI STEM funds were not more directly impacting them financially in the form of scholarships or to offset the cost of books. Now, our initial response was to inform them that there are federal requirements that funds can't be used to directly finance the students. This is a Title III HSI STEM grant, and that's one of the stipulations. As you can imagine, us telling them that did little to resolve the issue, and some of the student body were still very displeased, even going as far as picketing. We developed some materials, a trifold, a one-pager summary, and a presentation that we touted around campus, which presented the program design, the initial program results, but some voices on campus decried that as propaganda, us marching around the positive efficacy of the programming when the students felt that there was no impact. We consulted with our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and they had the insight and suggestion of holding a focus group. So holding that focus group allowed students to voice their concerns, and it alleviated much of the campus turmoil. Largely, we believe, because it validated their concerns and gave them a place to voice those concerns. We invited our program participants to reflect on their experiences and identify both merits of the program and issues that they encountered within the programming. Overall, the results were resoundingly positive, with very good suggestions for improvement. In order for the results to be appropriately perceived as unbiased, since I'm an internal evaluator and there was concern that the internal evaluation was biased, we solicited several graduate students in our sociology department to independently perform qualitative analysis of the focus group. Currently, they're finalizing the results, but even just offering the focus group and inviting participation has eased tensions on our campus dramatically. Once the qualitative analysis is finalized, we plan to bring the results back to the students through the associated student group and share with departments across campus and use that as foundation for a potential publication as well. Finally, we plan to use the results of the focus group to inform our programming responsively. The suggestions we received were fantastic, and we want to share those results in the broader dialogue of academia. So at this point, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention throughout today's presentation. Veronica mentioned earlier that she'll send out that suggested reading list to everyone, but if you don't see that come through, also feel free to contact her. This is her email address. Now I'm pulling up the Q&A. It seems that the few questions we've had have already been answered. Go ahead.
This is Rebecca jumping in, Stephen. Somebody asked about the Chen reference, which I actually put in the Q&A box. They wanted to know the recommended reading for the theory failure versus implementation failure. And if you're familiar with evaluation, Chen is a theory-driven evaluation. That is something that I think I would definitely recommend for everyone to read, regardless of the type of project that you have. So thank you for that question, and that'll also be part of the reading list.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rebecca.
Sure.
I think we can hang out for a couple minutes while we wait to see if any other questions come in for us to answer. But otherwise, we may hand it back over to Veronica.
All right. Thank you, Stephen and Rebecca. So yes, if there are any questions for our panelists, please feel free to type them in now in the Q&A chat box. We'll wait a few minutes to see if anybody has a question. So as I mentioned earlier, I will be sending out an email with a detailed reading list provided from Rebecca and Steven that has a reading list available for everyone for the references that we mentioned here today. I will be also sending a short survey for your feedback on today's webinar. It'll only take a minute or two, so please, if you see the survey, please take a second to go ahead and take it. Do we have any questions? Great presentation by you. Thank you. Also, if you would like to access our first webinar, which was on the implementation of program components, you can also visit our website and go to the webinars tab, and it'll be archived there. This webinar will be closed captioned and will be made available in a couple weeks, but I will also send that out to folks. Oh, we have some questions. May we have the PowerPoint? Rebecca, Steven, will the PowerPoint slides be made available?
I'm happy to make them available. That would
Perfect.
be to people, yeah.
Perfect. I can also send that out to folks.
Sure. I have another question, Veronica, that just came up. How do you handle evaluation costs at the proposal stage? I will tell you what we do is this we consider part of our business development. So we work, we don't charge for working on the proposal or the evaluation. And then obviously we agree to what the cost of the evaluation will be once it's funded. If it doesn't get funded, obviously we don't get paid. So we're certainly motivated to be able to provide as high quality work to our clients to help them get funded as possible, which is why we, again, often, I like to separate. I don't like to design the program because I don't think I could be a good objective evaluator of the program if I'm designing it. I encourage them to design it the way they want, but we also want to make sure that they are using really solid rationale and research literature and everything else as much as possible. So we'll give them feedback on that related to increase, strengthening their program design at that stage. So, but we don't charge for any of this. Like I said, it's just part of our business development. Is that, hopefully that answers your question. Can you speak to the cost related to type of evaluation? So I think this varies quite a bit. The industry standard for evaluation across multiple different types of projects, I would say, is usually 5 to 10% of direct costs. I think recently cost has been a little difficult because some people really bristle at that because it can be pretty high. But I will tell you, part of it is, making decisions about what you're going to do in terms of supporting the program versus evaluating the program. Clearly, we know every dollar that we take is not a dollar that can go to support students or other program activities directly. So we try to be really thoughtful about that and fair about that. And there are things that if you don't have a huge budget, they can, make choices about the types of activities. But I will tell you, there's got to be some kind of minimum amount that we would work with, because we obviously can't do a really high quality job and thorough reporting and everything else for like $10,000 or $15,000. That's just not feasible to do. We don't feel like we could do a good job for that amount. So we have had people ask us if we can, we don't have a lot for the budget, which maybe sometimes they could save money doing certain things, but we like to say a certain percentage of it because we know the kind of work and that goes into doing that. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what I generally would charge for an external evaluation. Other questions? Another question about marketing, suggestions for marketing that are allowable costs. I don't know if we can talk about allowable. I mean, I'm just thinking having a strategy, right? And something that will not cost you anything, or really in terms of having your allies on campus be aware of your program and then getting the word out. That kind of stuff is really invaluable. Like I said, often having an advisory board that will meet once or twice a year that are key individuals on campus that can really promote your program and reach out. Obviously, the outreach is really an important part of a lot of what happens within getting a project off the ground, and just having that word of mouth and And that's the kind of thing. I don't know about what's allowable or not to answer that specifically, but there's a lot you can do that costs nothing aside from, you know, staff time. I don't know, Steven, if you have anything else in terms of like marketing or getting the word out on an internal way.
No, I think that we haven't seen that come up as being an issue. When it comes to program marketing, our program is for first-time freshmen in STEM, being an HSI STEM grant, and we work closely with admissions and our marketing and communications department to, initially it was to solicit participation, but as we've grown, every incoming student in certain programs is automatically in the programming. So we haven't encountered a lot of problems there.
Okay, other questions? Hopefully that was helpful. No? Okay.
Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions. Again, if you have any questions for me, please send them directly to my email. I will send everybody a notification when we have this up on our website. Thank you again, Rebecca and Steven. This was a really great and informative presentation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end our meeting. Thank you, everyone who participated. Hope you have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good day. Bye-bye.